Cool. Good. Yeah. Well, today I wanted to talk about one of my very favorite spiritual teachers, Eckhart Tolle. If any of you are looking to expand your spiritual life, I highly recommend that you look into him. His breakthrough bestseller was The Power of Now. And today I'd like to talk about his book, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. And in this book, Eckhart Tolle talks about how each of us have a pain body. The pain body is made from the residual negative emotional energy left over from every unresolved, difficult, or painful experience that we've ever had. And it's a semi-autonomous energy form which lives within us. So I once knew a young lady, for our purposes, let's call her Miss X. And Miss X had a very heavy pain body. This caused her a lot of trouble communicating with her boyfriend. So her boyfriend would say, "You look really nice tonight, Miss X." And she'd say, "What, I didn't look good yesterday?" And that wasn't the worst of it either. So in essence, what was happening was she had events living within her from the past where she had been hurt, insulted, and so her pain body was keeping these events alive, and she was re-experiencing them in situations that had nothing to do with those past events. Her boyfriend was trying to give her a compliment, and she was reliving times when she had been insulted in the past. So fortunately, not all of us have a pain body quite as heavy as Miss X. But even those with lighter pain bodies, your pain body will become active at certain times. It might be dormant a lot more of the time, but it will become active. And typically what happens is there'll be an event which triggers your pain body to become active. So when something triggers your pain body, we call this pushing your buttons. So if something pushes your buttons, you know your pain body's become active. For myself, sometimes when my wife walks across the carpet with muddy shoes, sometimes that can trigger my pain body. But hey, we all have our things. Okay. And we did start to, well, one of the things about the pain body is even if you live in a miraculous world where nothing ever triggers your pain body, good luck with that, but even then, your pain body will become active at certain times because it's a semi-autonomous energy form that has its own primitive kind of intelligence. So periodically, it needs to feed, and it feeds on pain or unpleasant emotions. So maybe without even realizing it, you will pick a fight with a family member or something, and while you're fighting, pain body is feeding until it becomes satiated, and then it becomes dormant again. But it leaves you drained and more susceptible to illness. Or if you don't get in a fight, your pain body will trigger painful thoughts and feelings within you, and it will feed off of that. As children start developing their pain body, and so children sometimes experience overpowering emotions that they're not ready to deal with. So, as a result, they repress these emotions, and when you don't deal with your emotions, they add to your pain body. And really, unless there's an adult who gently and skillfully guides the child in dealing with its emotions, in many cases, children have no choice but to repress certain emotions. As adults, we can choose not to add to our pain body, but often we fall into habits that we developed as children of repressing certain emotions. Eckhart Tolle talks about watching ducks on a lake. Sometimes two ducks will get into a fight, and the fight itself only lasts for a few seconds. And then both ducks scatter to different parts of the pond. and then both ducks beat their wings vigorously for a little while. And in this way, Eckhart Tolle says, they are releasing the emotional charge that came from the fight. So they don't have to carry that emotion with them into the future. Who would have thought we could learn something so important from a duck? But there it is. It's wonderful. And Eckhart says that the key to freeing ourselves from the pain body is simply awareness. Be aware of when your pain body becomes active. Be aware while whatever it's doing, just be aware of that. And the very first step to freeing ourselves is simply to realize that we have a pain body. For many of us, this is the first time we've heard of a pain body. But much more than that, Eckhart Tolle is talking about how when our pain body becomes active, usually we are completely identified with it. We really think it is us, that we are it. We're not aware that this thing is kind of, in a sense, taken over us. So we can train ourselves to become aware of when the pain body becomes active, and we can simply say to ourselves, my pain body is active now. Of course, when other people hear you talking to yourself about your pain body, they might look at you funny, but oh heck, you can even say it silently. That would work. And that's not even the point. The point is just noticing and acknowledging whenever your pain body becomes active is the first step in disidentifying from that pain body, of developing some distance so you can see it in a larger perspective for what it really is. And just keep aware of whatever it does. And there's a real act of surrendering here, because we don't want to try to fight against the pain body, because that won't really do any good. In many cases, we'll just make it stronger. Instead, we accept it for what it is. We release resistance. We surrender to whatever situation we're in that brought up the pain body to begin with, because resistance simply causes more unhappiness, more suffering, and would strengthen the pain body. Eckhart Tolle tells a wonderful story about surrendering, and this is a true story from his own life, which I will now read. In the late 70s, I would have lunch every day with one or two friends in the cafeteria of the Graduate Center at Cambridge University, where I was studying. A man in a wheelchair would sometimes sit at a nearby table, usually accompanied by 3 or 4 people. One day, when he was sitting at a table directly opposite me, I could not help but look at him more closely, and I was shocked by what I saw. He seemed almost totally paralyzed. His body was emaciated, his head permanently slumped forward. One of the people accompanying him was carefully putting food in his mouth, a great deal of which would fall out again and be caught on a small plate another man was holding under his chin. Occasionally, the wheelchair-bound man would produce unintelligible croaking sounds, and someone would hold an ear close to his mouth and then amazingly would interpret what he was trying to say. Later, I asked my friend whether he knew who he was. Of course, he said. He is a professor of mathematics, and the people with him are his graduate students. He has motor neuron disease that progressively paralyzes every part of the body. He has been given 5 years at the most. It must be the most dreadful fate that can befall a human being. A few weeks later, as I was leaving the building, he was coming in, and when I held the door open for his electric wheelchair to come through, our eyes met. With surprise, I saw that his eyes were clear. There was no trace in them of unhappiness. I knew immediately that he had relinquished resistance. He was living in surrender. A number of years later, when buying a newspaper at a kiosk, I was amazed to see him on the front page of a popular international news magazine. Not only was he still alive, but he had by then become the world's most famous theoretical physicist, Stephen Hawking. There was a beautiful line in the article that confirmed what I had sensed when I looked into his eyes many years earlier. Commenting upon his life, he said, now with the help of a voice synthesizer, who could have wished for more? So that's the power of surrendering, of releasing resistance. Now, when we have negative emotions such as anxiety, sadness, anger, the emotion by itself is actually not suffering. I know I was as surprised as you guys are about this, but actually what usually happens is that there's a story we tell ourselves about this emotion to explain why we're unhappy. And this story itself actually is what causes our suffering. We create our suffering by the thoughts that we think. Typically we'll say, it's his or her fault that I'm unhappy. If they didn't do this mean thing to me, if my coworker didn't talk in such an annoying way, I wouldn't have this unhappiness now. Or maybe it's a situation, if the economy wasn't so bad, I would have gotten a good raise and I would be happy by now. But all these stories have something in common. They're all about the past or the future. What they're not about is being fully present in the here and now moment. So the reality of what takes place is first we experience an emotion, and then our ego mind creates a story to explain it to ourselves. And so what happens if we take away this story? What happens if we take away the past and the future and we're fully and completely present in the here and now with our emotion and with whatever situation that we find ourselves in? Well, actually something wonderful happens. There's a kind of space that forms around the emotion, a kind of spaciousness enters in. And something else happens, which is that presence begins to arise within us. Awareness of our divine nature, of our Christ nature, which is in perfect peace and wholeness at all times. In fact, our divine self, our divine nature is always present, but it's usually covered up by, our awareness of it is covered up by the compulsive, constant stream of thoughts that's always going through our heads at all times. I'd invite each of you, if you wish, sometime to take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of your time. Sit in a quiet room, close your eyes, and for 5 minutes, just observe the thoughts that go through your head. Well, the first thing you might find it's very difficult to do that because we tend to be very identified with our thoughts. We can become so absorbed in our thoughts and the emotions that they create that we don't have the distance to actually observe our thoughts for 5 whole minutes. 5 minutes really isn't very long if you think about it. But if you do manage to observe your thoughts for 5 minutes, you might find a couple of things. One is you might be surprised at just how many thoughts you think in only 5 minutes. And two is you might find that there are certain repetitive thoughts and emotions and reactive patterns, reactions to those thoughts. And these persistent thoughts, emotions, and reactive patterns that keep coming back over and over, these are the thoughts we're most identified with, and they also form our ego. And so our ego is the part of us that feels separate from other people and from everything else. So Eckhart tells a wonderful Zen story about the constant stream of thoughts that's going through our heads. A Zen master was walking in silence with one of his disciples along a mountain trail. When they came to an ancient cedar tree, they sat down under it for a simple meal of some rice and vegetables. After the meal, the disciple, a young monk who had not yet found the key to the mystery of Zen, broke the silence by asking the master, "Master, how do I enter Zen?" He was, of course, inquiring how to enter the state of consciousness, which is Zen. The master remained silent. Almost 5 minutes passed while the disciple anxiously waited for an answer. He was about to ask another question when the master suddenly spoke. "Do you hear the sound of that mountain stream?" The disciple had not been aware of any mountain stream. He had been too busy thinking about the meaning of Zen. Now, as he began to listen for the sound, his noisy mind subsided. At first, he heard nothing. Then, his thinking gave way to heightened alertness. And suddenly, he did hear the hardly perceptible murmur of a small stream in the far distance. "Yes, I can hear it now," he said. The master raised his finger and, with a look in his eyes that in some way was both fierce and gentle, said, "Enter Zen from there." The disciple was stunned. It was his first Satori, a flash of enlightenment. He knew what Zen was without knowing what it was that he knew. They continued on their journey in silence. The disciple was amazed at the aliveness of the world around him. He experienced everything as if for the first time. Gradually, however, he started thinking again. The alert stillness became covered up by mental noise, and before long he had another question. "Master," he said, "I have been thinking, what would you have said if I hadn't been able to hear the mountain stream?" The master stopped, looked at him, raised his finger and said, "Enter Zen from there." So, that is the power of being in the here and now, of being completely in the present moment. And there's many different ways that people use to help themselves be in the here and now moment. One is a way that we discussed before, which is when either your ego or your pain body comes up, simply observe it, be aware of it, and don't try to change it. And that can be a very powerful way of staying in the here and the now moment. Another is what we heard in the Zen story, through your physical senses being completely alert to your environment. So much, 100% of your attention is in your environment, and you have no attention left over for thinking about the past or the future. Eckhart Tolle says that he likes to gaze upon flowers, real flowers, of course. He says that flowers have such a light and open vibration to them that they help us arise that same presence within ourselves, and that presence always brings us into the here and now. And there are some other things that Eckhart likes besides just flowers. He likes gazing upon crystals. He likes babies. Big shock. And he likes birds. Birds have raised their vibrational energy to where they are free of the earth, and they can fly through the air, and they can also help presence arise within each of us. So those are very useful ways, I think. But there's an even more basic way to arise that presence within yourself. Sometimes flowers or babies are not around, so you can use this. And that is simply to sense the aliveness within your own body, which is always there. The inner body, the life energy which animates your body. And it's something that you can do with practice, it becomes easier and easier. You can do it while you're doing other things. In the beginning, you might need to pay complete attention to just that, but you can do that while you're listening to someone talk. We'll do more with that in the meditation. But if any of you are interested in any of the things I touched on today, I hope you'll look into Eckhart. There's a lot more here than what I could cover today. Well, thanks for hanging out, guys. This was fun. This was awesome. Thank you.